What's good, DMV Sports Zone? It's been a long time, but I am back. It's Noah. Really excited to be back on the channel and be talking about fantasy hockey and basketball for the Wizards and the Capitals. The regular season for fantasy is approaching the end, we're heading towards fantasy basketball playoffs. We have only 2 more weeks, not including this week, for fantasy hockey. So I want to talk about a quick recap, but more importantly, who are the players that you can watch, as Capital and Wizards fans, but who is available player-wise that you need to pick up to make the final push to the playoffs. Without further ado, remember all my data is coming from SportAI. More information on the mobile app is in the bio. And now, let's get started. So first things first, let's talk about those Washington Capitals. A lot of my different takes and talking about the different sleepers, they haven't changed that much. But of course, as the Capitals and Peter Laviolette, arguably in my opinion, coach of the year, continues their surge up the standings, we have guys like Alexander Ovechkin, Yevgeny Kuznetsov, John Carlson, Tom Wilson, Nicholas Backstrom, TJ Oshie. These are guys that have already been picked up on over 70% of ESPN rosters. So I can't really give you a suggestion, hey, pick these players up, because they're probably going to be on somebody's team already. But who are the players that you can pick up right now, owned in under 40% of fantasy leagues, even as low as 2%, that are the sleeper of the sleepers that can help your fantasy hockey team break that barrier? Well, let's give it a quick rundown. So let's first talk about Connor Sheary. So Connor Sheary's had limited minutes, and that really turned off a lot of people. It probably would decrease the scoring, but with that second line power play role and middle 6 minutes, he's actually getting a lot of opportunities to shine, and it's really showing. He's had 6 goals in the past 10 games, and he's not a streaky player. Once he gets going, he doesn't really slow down. The only thing that was holding him back before was injuries. Remember his time in Pittsburgh on the Crosby line. He did a great job. He's a small speedster, and he's only owned in 2% of ESPN leagues, guys. Like, come on. Sleeper pick of the sleeper pick. You want to look like a genius. Connor Sheary is a must pick up in fantasy hockey lineups. What about everybody else? Dmitry Orlov, Lars Eller. Guys I've talked about week by week, even before my long hiatus. These are guys that are so valuable to playoff and championship winning fantasy teams, because you need depth at center and you need depth on your blue line. Especially the blue line is very hard to find well-balanced scorers. A lot of times, like Shane Gosper, for example, he is a player that's an offensive defenseman, but with that plus-minus on a bad Arizona Coyotes team, really kind of hinders his value. But Orlov's on a good team, gets a good plus-minus, gets the power play points, gets the assists, occasionally chips in a goal. That's extremely valuable as well. Eller and deeper league, you're in a 12 to 16 team hockey league. Lars Eller is a really valuable center to pick up as well. And then finally, I think the goalie debate is finally over. Vita Vanacek looks to be the future of the net for the Washington Capitals. It remains to be seen what we do with Ilya Samsonov. He may go the path of, ironically, Semyon Varlamov leaving the Capitals, because right now it looks like we're prioritizing Vanacek, especially as we're a playoff team. Goalies are the most difficult position in fantasy hockey, especially consistent goalies, because you got guys like Elvis McCandless for the Columbus Blue Jackets, for example, or Edinger for the Stars, who are putting up huge shutout games and then giving up 5 goals the next game, partially because either their team is bad in the case of the Blue Jackets, or they're inconsistent defense in the case of the Stars. So Vanacek is extremely important to pick up now. He's only around 47% of leagues. Must pick up. I still, even personally run the Vanacek Samsonov pipeline. Have Samsonov for insurance, just in case Vanacek goes down. He has had injuries throughout the season. You have Samsonov in there to be a serviceable depth fantasy goaltender. But yeah, nothing much more to say. The Capitals, luckily for DC fans, have always delivered, not only in the real world, but in fantasy. So we have obviously those big stars, but Sheary, Eller, Orlov, Vanacek, Samsonov. You got to keep an eye on these guys, and you got to pick them up if you have the roster space to do so. Of course, you don't want to win a fantasy championship. You don't have to, but I want to win. So those are some of the good players to pick up right now. Now let's transition to the Wizards. The Wizards are on a totally different spectrum. With Bradley Beal out for the season, we traded away almost all the veterans that we actually picked up only less than half a year ago. Dinwiddie, Harrell, all of them are gone. Now we have a lot of openings, and this is much more of a tricky situation. So obviously, players like Porzingis and Kuzma are owned in over 70% of leagues. There's a very low chance they're going to be available in your league. So let's look at the situation of the Wizards and see what can open up. So the Wizards right now are still in play-in contention. They can still technically make the play-in. So as of right now, you can clearly see that they're trying to balance winning with development of their young players. KCP is on fire right now, surging his numbers up to 12 points a game per season. It was as low as 10 earlier in the season, really stepping up and getting a much bigger role scoring-wise without Beal. He's a streaky scorer, though, which can be dangerous. But, of course, fantasy is a week-long battle, so you can really average out that kind of scoring average, and he's a great depth forward. He's owned in only 30 to 40% of leagues, depending on your platform. ESPN has him at under 40%, so he's a great asset to pick up as you push for the playoffs. You need someone that kind of is a 3-and-D guy. He can get the threes, he can get steals, so he's extremely valuable in categories, but points he offers well-balanced stats as well. But another player to talk about is Rui Hachimura, Thomas Bryant, Daniel Gafford. Again, very similar to the Vanecek-Samsonov situation with the Capitals. It changed drastically once the path of the team changed. Before, they were okay with giving Bryant and Hachimura limited minutes when they returned, but with Harrell leaving and the team kind of teetering on a rebuild mode, you're seeing a lot more priority given for minutes for both Bryant and Hachimura at the cost of Gafford. So Bryant's really surging right now, as well as Hachimura. But the thing is, they're surging to consistency, just being average fantasy players. So what does that say? Especially when you got Avdia and Kispert in the mix as well. Well, if the season starts to not look that great, especially in the playoffs, because again, this is the last week of the fantasy regular season, but the regular season still has a couple of weeks before it ends. So you want to keep an eye on if the Wizards want to try to just rebuild and prioritize their young players. If that's the case, then now Avdia, Kispert, Rui, and Bryant are going to suddenly eat a lot more minutes. And players like Ish Smith and Raul Neto, who people always talk about as sleeper picks recently, will have their value diminished. Especially if they're trying to go into rebuild mode. Neto and Smith are going to be gone after this season. I think regardless if they make the play-in or not. But right now, they're playing a lot because they are still in contention. So right now, those are recommended players to pick up. But if the season continues to go south, we continue to lose games. It's the bad teams, the Trailblazers, for example, and we are no longer playoff contention, and we want to just rebuild, then you got to keep an eye out on Hachimura, Bryant, Avdia, and Kispert. Kispert is on borderline because he's getting the minutes, but he's not the type of player that's really fantasy friendly. He shoots a lot, offers barely anything in defensive stats, barely anything in assists and rebounds, almost a pure scorer. So either way, I think in either situation can be avoided, but the other three players that I mentioned can be valuable as the team rebuilds. If they continue to fight for that playoff spot, then Ish Smith and Raul Neto need to be players that be on your watch list. You need to pick them up. Very consistent in terms of, they're not the greatest scorers, but they provide the steals, they provide the assists, and chip in a little bit of rebounds, just enough to be a great depth fantasy guard, especially in deep leagues in categories, because categories, multifaceted players are everything. Those are underrated assets to pick up. So in conclusion, like I said, the Capitals have a clear path, much easier to determine. Sheary is a great player to pick up in fantasy. Orlov, Vanecek, safety net, Samsonov. But in the case of the Wizards, it's very interesting to see if they're going to rebuild or not. And it really determines if they rebuild, prioritize Avdia, Hachimura, Bryant. If they continue to try to fight for the play-in spot, look at Ish Smith, Raul Neto, and Daniel Gafford. Again, he's probably owned in most leagues, so that's not going to really affect anybody. But very different paths there. So keep an eye out. Make your decision from there. I know it's a long video, but I want to do a good season-ending recap. Very excited for both teams' futures. I know, the Commanders are all the talk in the world with Carson Wentz, but we still got two other teams with very different futures in the short term, but hopefully long term, both end up champions. So again, this is Noah. Great to be back on the channel. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below, and I will hopefully see you sometime soon. Peace.